There are 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and me going back on my word and making another episode to a series I previously said would be done and over with. Hey everyone, welcome back to another League of Legends video, and I'm back with another episode of Removed Abilities. Hey, hear me out, the last episode was over a year ago, and in that episode I said maybe in the distant future I'll bring the series back. Well, I think a year and change is enough for that, and besides, there's still quite a few I haven't gone over that are worth taking a look at. So for today we're going to be checking out some more old abilities in League that were deleted from the game or reworked into something different. Got a couple interesting ones to talk about this time around. First ability will be Vladimir Z, Tides of Blood. The current iteration of Vladimir Z has a very simple yet effective purpose, charging up over a second or two before unleashing a massive radial burst of damage. What makes this ability so dangerous is that not only does it have incredible scaling on account of being based on both ability power and max health, but having only a 5-second cooldown at rank 5 and the massive AoE, giving Vladimir unbelievable amounts of teamfight pressure in the mid to late game. The old iteration of Tides of Blood had a similar purpose, but rather than being more burst oriented, it was more like a ramping DPS tool. How it worked was that Vladimir would damage all nearby enemies just like he does now, and then in a similar fashion to Hecarim's Q Rampage, subsequent casts of Tides of Blood would deal more base damage as well as give him bonus spell vamp and HP regeneration, maxing at 4 stacks, making Vladimir more of a ramping battle mage as opposed to the more bursty playstyle that he has now. It was a pretty big ability too, a single cast of a full powered E on a minion wave would practically heal him to full. As for which one is better, it's hard to say because they fundamentally differ in purpose. The old Tides of Blood excelled at consistent DPS. Not that the new one doesn't, but the new one definitely has more upfront power given you don't have to stack it. And while the new one does have more damage packed into it, the fact that you can body block his current E makes it easier to play around, whereas the old E would unconditionally hit every target inside the area. In my opinion though, current Tides of Blood is definitely the healthier design one. Alrighty, moving on to the next one, we have Aatrox's Q, Dark Flight. One of the more interesting engage tools in League because of its unique interaction, but also its amazing power. Aatrox would channel for a brief moment before charging at a target location, with all enemies in the center being knocked up for 1 second. What makes Dark Flight so unique is that it was the only regular dash in the game that could be fully interrupted before it even went through. The additional cast time given to his Q gave the enemy team a pretty long window to buffer any kind of displacement crowd control on reaction, which in turn made Aatrox's Q one of the worst dash abilities in the game purely from a consistency standpoint. However, it was almost warranted because if you think about it, a free target dash alone is already a solid ability in its own right, much less a free target dash that does AoE damage on arrival and no small amount at that. When taking a look at Dark Flight scaling and comparing it to a similar ability like say Kha'Zix's Z, you almost never have to concern yourself with Leak doing a ton of damage in and of itself. Dark Flight on the other hand could. Secondarily though, how often do you get a free target dash that's also a 1 second AoE knockup? By all accounts, it was a watered down Malphite ultimate on a basic ability. In fact, in version 7.19 they made it so once the ascent completed, the descent portion made him unstoppable, so it quite literally was the Malphite ultimate, albeit with a bit more restrictions behind it. In a way, the extra cast time on his Q was necessary to balance out the increased reward. I really enjoyed this ability, being an old school Aatrox main. Alrighty, for our third ability, we'll be going over Corki's W. Now you might be thinking, what about Corki's W? Valkyrie's the same it's always been. And you're right, it's a free target dash that puts a trail of fire behind him, kind of like Quay's Molten Fissure. Actually, on a side note, I feel like not many people talk about his base W, but my god, the trail of fire and leaves behind actually has the same damage output as like a rumble equalizer. It's just no one really notices because they focus on the dash part. But I digress. The part of Corki's W I want to talk about is of course Special Delivery, aka the package. From 10 minutes onward, every 5 minutes, Corki gains access to a package at spawn that he can pick up by right-clicking it and channeling for 1 second, at which point he gets 40% bonus movement speed out of combat and can cast an empowered version of his W within the next 45 seconds. Despite being a W, not an ultimate, Special Delivery has all the makings of a super ultimate. To begin with, it is an incredibly far dash of 1800 units of range, exceeding even Zack's Elastic Slingshot, and it's an uninterruptible dash to boot. Furthermore, all enemies within the path are knocked aside, and Corki leaves behind a massive trail that heavily slows and burns enemies for 2 seconds. For all intents and purposes, Special Delivery was a rumble equalizer, but bigger, stronger, and more slowing. Like, even just getting hit by the initial dash would cause you to take something like 9 to 1500 damage in the late game. And if you were crazy enough to step inside it, you would literally get roasted alive. Keep in mind, similar to Rengar's empowered abilities, Corki could still cast a regular Valkyrie after using Special Delivery. His package was pretty much an auto teamfight win tool for how much area control, pressure, and engage potential it gave Corki and by extension his team. This move was terrifying to deal with, especially if the Corki player knew what they were doing. I'm actually glad it's no longer in the game because if the enemy Corki had a package, you pretty much just had to give the opposing team the objective. The risk of fighting him with special delivery active was simply too high. Continuing down the list, I want to talk about Draven's old passive. League of Draven might be the biggest Mandela effect of all time, second only behind Graves' Cigar. I think everyone's under the impression that Draven's passive has always been League of Draven, where he gets bonus gold if he kills a champion based on the amount of stacks accumulated. As it turns out, he had a completely different passive before that. It was called Wicked Blades. Anytime he landed a critical strike or a spinning axe on a target, it would apply a 4-second bleed to a target that would carry over any remaining damage on successive applications, meaning it would bleed for more and more for every crit or Q you took. From a thematic perspective, both Wicked Blades and League of Draven make sense to have on Draven. The latter obviously plays into Draven's penchant for showmanship, and the former paid homage to him being Darius' brother, and the two both having a passive that applies a stacking bleed on targets. Pragmatically though, I wonder which passive would have been better for Draven. One gives him more snowball potential but no actual combat value whatsoever, not intrinsically that is, whereas the other one did. I mean, it's a question of power budget. If they were to take away League of Draven and reinstate Wicked Blades, they'd have to nerf his damage elsewhere a little bit so as not to just ultra buff him early game. If any Draven main is watching this, which passive do you prefer? I think more people would go for the old one given it provides consistent value. Let's talk about an ultimate ability. I want to go over Akali's old ultimate actually, Shadow Dance. Prevailing Wisdom knows Akali as a hyper-mobile, infinite dashes, infinite move speed evasion termite that one-shots your entire family. The old Akali, despite being marketed as an assassin, was less of an assassin and more of a rush-down hit-and-run fighter. Not that she had no burst damage, rather her gameplay was built around her insane stick potential. If her goal was to chase down a target, not a single soul on the planet was able to get away from her thanks to Shadow Dance. Akali had access to up to 3 700 unit dashes at a time, building up in charges, meaning in total she could gap close up to 2100 units within 4 seconds. Furthermore, Akali would also be able to acquire a free charge of her dash upon scoring a takedown, making her play sort of like a Katarina where she would dash to a target, dispatch them, then reset onto the next champion, and then the next champion, and then the next. In many ways, Akali's old ultimate was identical to Ahri's current Spirit Rush, wherein she could start with 3 and then get more with every enemy champion down. Compared to Perfect Execution, which by most people's definition qualifies as an all-in tool, Shadow Dance was more for stick potential as it didn't really do a lot of damage. Mind you, if you dashed onto a target 3 times, then yes, it was a ton of damage, but nowhere close to the same insta-kill potential Perfect Execution has. Although, I wonder, similar to Draven, both iterations of Akali's ultimate carry their own range of pros and cons. One offers more immediate front-loaded impact, whereas the other presents increased staying power. The biggest strength of old Akali was her ability to fight basically forever. Outside of Twilight Shroud, her abilities had very low cooldowns, making it so energy needs aside, she would never gas out. Those of you who played both old and new Akali, which one do you prefer? Shadow Dance or Perfect Execution? Let me know in the comments down below. Let's move on though and talk about one of the most interesting abilities in the game's history, Aurelion's old Q, Starsurge. If you're wondering, I already talked about Center of the Universe in a previous episode. In trying to make an ability that played around Asol's entire notion of positioning and expansion, they decided to give him one of the highest variance abilities in the entire game, fitting for a champion as inconsistent as he once was. At the least, Starsurge was a basic AoE blast of damage with a very short stun behind it, and similar to his passive, a minimum distance, meaning he couldn't use it at point blank unless he was running away. What made this ability potentially game deciding though was the sheer size it could expand up to when including Comet of Legend, his old E, not only causing the effect radius of his Q to expand to literally the entire screen, but also increase the stun timer to potentially 3 seconds, making it the strongest AoE crowd control in the game. While you practically never saw it happen, the few instances of Asol actually pulling off a Mega Starsurge was a spectacle. And to its credit, there were a couple pragmatic use cases with the move. For example, if the enemy team was doing Dragon or Baron, Asol could easily collapse on them with a full power Starsurge and wipe out the entire enemy team. A great setup tool that unfortunately wasn't too effective in normal combat scenarios. I'd venture to guess Asol players would have much rather had any conventional rooting ability like a Lux Q or Zyra E, stuff like that. The previous iteration of Asol will always be a relic of time that people can look back on and reminisce, but I think we can all agree that the champion concept was simply far too impractical for the scope of League. Perhaps in a different genre like an MMO where bosses had predictable AI and stuff maybe, but in this game, definitely not. When you picture Evelynn's current ultimate, the first thing to come to mind would be what? Execute, right? Last Caress is all about being the finishing blow before Evelynn retreats back to safety and becomes invisible so she can do it all over again. an extremely deadly attack with the potential to execute multiple targets at once. But going back to old Evelynn's kit, her previous ultimate used to have an altogether different purpose. Rather than using it to end the fight, you actually used it to start one. Agony's Embrace was a massive area blast that did % current health damage to all enemies before heavily slowing them for 2 seconds, upon which Evelynn would gain a shield for every enemy champion struck. The old Evelynn had no way of initiating a fight because her Q was like a Karthus Q you just smashed over and over, and her W was a speed boost, and her E was just a double attack. Looking back, Evelynn might have had one of the most underwhelming ultimates in the game. Not completely unusable, but being % current health without any base damage, Evelynn's ultimate was entirely pointless unless you used it at the very beginning of a fight, since it would never, and I repeat never, kill the target, even at 2 HP. I'm fairly certain there wasn't any minimum damage threshold. On the other hand, the shield value did have the potential to be very strong, as she could get up to a 1500 HP shield, but it was such an unusual ability to have on a champion who, even back then, was intended to be a hybrid between skirmisher and assassin. A move like this would have made more sense on like, I don't know, a battle mage or whatever. But even then, I can't think of any champion who would want this ultimate over just about anything else. Old Evelynn was definitely a product of antiquated champion design. If you take a look at her kit in its entirety, it was a jumbled mess of abilities with no inherent synergy between them other than use one after the other. Granted, Evelynn got fixed up in like, I think, Season 7? Obviously, if she were in the present day, her kit would have been misscoped to be far more effective nowadays. Final ability I want to go through for today will be Darius's Q, Decimate, and for additional context I'll include his passive. Now I know what you're thinking, they're the same exact abilities, what's all the fuss? Conceptually, his Q was the same ability wherein he strikes in a circle around him with the outer range hitting for more and applying a stack of bleed. Just one very, and I emphasize, very key difference between the two. The original Decimate was instantaneous, 0 cast time, you just pressed it and bam, all enemies around you took damage. The caveat was that his Q didn't use to heal, so during the mid-scope they made it to where there would be a delay, but in exchange he could heal for a substantial amount. Still though, yet another instance of like both of them have their pros and cons. The single biggest counterplay against Darius is avoiding his Q. If he can't land the sweet spot of his Q, that's like a solid quarter of his entire rotation, so even if it meant not being able to heal when using it, an instant cast time makes it 10 times harder to avoid his Q, and most importantly, it accelerates his DPS and trade combo. Countless times when playing Darius, I died in the midst of the cast time and I just wish I had the old one again. Conversely though, without the healing, Darius can get easily chunked out of lane and never recover. Juggernaut needs some semblance of healing or shielding to account for taking a lot of damage purely by existing. All Darius players, which do you prefer? Now regarding his old passive, two main differences with Hemorrhage. First, it used to do magic damage, which is a bigger deal than you'd think. Darius was pretty tricky to itemize against given his Q, W, and autos did physical damage while his passive did magic. Current Darius does all physical damage outside of his ultimate, meaning armor items can help out a ton with addressing his DPS. In fairness though, he used to only get 25% armor penetration from his E compared to the insane 40% he gets now. That's besides the point though. Instead of the immense bonus AD and instant 5 stacks he got when activating Noxian Might, Hemorrhage was simply just given bonus movement speed per enemy champion affected by his bleed. Once more, one has incredible backloader value and makes him a demon to fight in extended traits, but the other gives better pressure in the early game and makes him not have to rely so much on Ghost. I mean, obviously the value Noxian Might gives you is just too good to pass up, but really it's the Q difference I can't quite figure out which one I want. Would he be better with an instant Q that didn't heal or the current delayed Q that does heal? Again, Darius mains, let me know your thoughts. Alrighty, so that wraps up episode 8 of Removed Abilities. I honestly could do maybe 1 or 2 more, but just to maintain variety, we'll put in a few other video topics here and there. If you guys enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you'll to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my previous episodes on this series if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.